Hello, my name is Donnelle, and I'd personally like to welcome you here to Hearst Castle. Now, we're aware that folks want to make sure that they can take part in nature still in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. You're encouraged to do so by taking a walk or a run, a bike ride or a hike, and staying local in your own neighborhoods while practicing safe social distancing measures of 6 feet or greater. Many of state parks have been closed due to this pandemic, either partially or entirely. Some of them are just closed to visitor access by way of the parking lots, and others are just a little bit more entirely closed. We're trying to compensate for that by putting together news feeds and video clips, and we ask that you stay tuned to those updates by going on to parks.ca.gov. Now, I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about the dining experience here at Hearst Castle. William Randolph Hearst, the media mogul and newspaper tycoon, would invite guests up here during its heyday. They'd enjoy some cocktails and conversation before he'd invite them through these doors here for an evening of dining. The dining hall tends to give off the elaborateness of a dining hall fit to serve a feast to a king. And some of my younger visitors say that it reminds them of something out of a set from Harry Potter or Hogwarts. And the most logical explanation for that is the research team for the set designers for those movies visited us looking for those ideas. That's not to say that this was their inspiration. They visited many castles throughout Europe and other places as well. It's just a cool, fun little fact. Mr. Hearst, however, he preferred a simpler dining style. You might actually notice it by the casual use of the condiment bottles on the table. There's ketchup and mustard, in his day jars of pickles and Worcester sauce as well. And saltine crackers on basic porcelain blue willow stoneware, not the finest china we know he could have provided. Basic stainless flatware, instead of the finest silver we know he could have provided, just as is demonstrated by the silver collection surrounding the room, including 10 pounds of silver just in this ceremonial mace made in Dublin. He even once owned the official mace of Galway. It'll be returned to them in a ceremony by his wife Millicent almost a decade after his death in 1961. That simpler dining style that Mr. Hearst preferred is also reflected by paper napkins. Technically not these paper napkins, but he said that he used them because it saved on laundry. His son Bill Jr. said this simpler dining style reminded him of his time up here camping and in tents and climbing trees in simpler times. Now, the etiquette of the day here is that the newest and some felt the most important guests were actually seated closest to the host and hostess. Mr. Hearst did not sit at the head of the table. He sat here. His longtime companion and actress Marion Davies would be seated across from him. It afforded them an opportunity to socialize with more guests at one time. British author and humorist P.G. Wodehouse will recall his first visit. He felt real important that first night. He was seated right next to Marion Davies that first night. He did notice, however, as those nights went on, he found that his place setting had been edged further and further down until he found it at the very end of the table and thought it best he should leave, for fear he may find himself feeding on the floor the next day. He didn't want to overstay his welcome. Sometimes it might have been necessary for Mr. Hearst to pass a subtle hint like that, and the guests were typically invited by way of an invitation that gave them a date of arrival, but not a date of departure. Those of you familiar with the Marx Brothers, you might recall Harpo Marx as the one who didn't speak. He spoke, and some folks might consider these to be the hot seats. When he sat here, he said he didn't know whether his food was cold or not. His body temperature was so hot, he was quite certain they had to burn at least 2 trees to heat the mantle that evening. 41 mantles on the property, and 30 of them are here in Casa Grande. The other 11 are throughout the cottages, and almost all of them are French. He even said it was a race to the finish to see if he could burn off the weight faster than the way that he was eating. It was just a paraphrase. And that architect, the one that he had that 28-year collaboration with, Julia Morgan, Well, she'd travel back and forth between here and her home in San Francisco. This is Project 503 out of over 700 for her. She would be seated right next to Mr. Hearst when she was here the same time as him. She could be seen drawing something and passing it over to him. He could be seen drawing something and passing it over to her. Her draftsman, Walter Stylberg, will recall that when the two of them were in the same room, it was as though no one else was in the room. And he said he wouldn't have been surprised to have seen a spark travel from one skull to the other. These two incredibly different people, they just seemed to click. Imagine the discussions they must have been having just in deciding to design this dining hall with all of its Gothic architectural elements. For example, these are 15th century Spanish choir stalls. You see, some of these seats are popped back like so. Well, those are called mercy seats. It was for the mercy of the poor monks. They had to stand for incredibly long hours and listen to those sermons. But they could take a little weight off their feet and put a little on their seat. The seats that are pulled down is for those who it was appropriate to have a seat during that time. Julia Morgan, William Randolph Hearst, well, they're utilizing these for an entirely different reason. You see, they like a Gothic element that each of them holds. It's known as the ogee-arch. Kind of looks like this. You might notice it in each and every one of these. It's sort of like hands praying to God, some folks have said. There was a tremendous amount of faith in the church. Well, that ogee-arch is featured throughout the motif of this entire room. You might have already noticed it in the mantel. It's two-tiered above the doorways on both sides of the room. It's even tri-fold atop of that 14th century reja in the musician's loft. And the 14th century reja even features it in the center of its raised grille door. All of the windows are framed with that ogee-arch. All these Gothic elements are designed to draw our eye upwards, and as it is drawn upwards, it's kind of hard not to notice the very colorful palio banners. They represent the horse race of the districts in Siena, Italy. That horse race still takes place today. The horses are ridden by their riders bareback, and if the horse makes it around the finish line and its rider isn't attached, they still win their race so long as their medallion is attached. Even those are pointing upwards at a 16th century carved wood Italian ceiling. Mary is in the center coffer. There's gods and goddesses, prophets, saints, coats of arms, things of that nature in that ceiling. But that's not the primary reason they're drawing our eye upwards. The primary reason is they're creating an architectural illusion, an illusion that this room is taller than it is wide, when in actuality this room is only 27 feet tall, but it is indeed 28.5 feet wide. Just another one of the marvels when these two great minds are clicking and designing. Typically, Mr. Hearst is serving a very traditional American-style meal in here. Everything from poultry to lamb. He liked a well-aged rare beef. Pressed duck is another favorite of his to serve. Lots of fresh veggies. All these things being raised here on the ranch. He called this the ranch. It wasn't even his big ranch. The big ranch he owned was in Chihuahua, Mexico, known as Babicata, and it was over 1 million acres. That's roughly the size of Rhode Island, less 12 miles, give or take. If we're going to go down that rabbit hole, I might as well also let you know he didn't call this the castle. Not typically. He owned a castle. It was in Cardiff, Wales. It was known as St. Donat's. I'd imagine he'd have a much finer accommodation for his guests when he's entertaining at the castle. Think of some of the varied guests that he is entertaining at any one of his magnificent homes. You've got the likes of Albert Einstein, Charles Lindbergh, Amelia Earhart, and Howard Hughes. At this very table, you could imagine George Bernard Shaw, the famous Irish playwright. They might seat him right next to young tennis star Alice Marble, only 18 years old when she visited the Hilltop, a Wimbledon champ, the #1 singles women's tennis player from 1936 to 1940. She had a photographic memory. Perhaps that's the reason she was seated right next to that famous Irish playwright. He wouldn't call her a bubblehead like he was known to do with many other women. Imagine actor and author David Niven. He would reply, "The wine poured like glue from this dining room table." Mel Ingle, Mr. Hearst waiter in the 1930s, one of many, he said we had to be ready to serve dinner no later than 7 p.m., but sometimes that dinner wouldn't be served till midnight. And it wasn't because we, the kitchen staff, weren't ready. It's because they had to wait till the host and hostess were ready to serve. Eventually, though, Mr. Hearst would want to clear this room. And the way that he found best to accomplish that would be to offer them a nice after-dinner dessert liqueur, and they could carry overflow conversations from this table into other parts of the castle. We do hope that you'll visit us again and join in on these future feeds. Remember, the website is to go to parks.ca.gov for updates and future viewings. Once again, stay well and be safe. Thank you.